everyone. It is Mark. What? No sound. No, I wasn't talking yet. Should be sound, right? Should be sound now. Let's see. Yeah, plenty of sound. Plenty of sound by my account. So, hi everyone. It's Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore, and welcome to MuseScore Café. So this is my weekly series where I talk about, some aspect of making music with MuseScore, and usually or often I have a particular subject that I want to talk about. On the first Wednesday I do a let me mute this for a second here over there. First Wednesday I do an Ask Me Anything session, and third Wednesday I've been doing kind of a score of the month where I just go for it, entering some music, and I'll be doing that next week. Today, and other weeks I usually have a particular subject in mind. Today I don't exactly, because I mentioned I wasn't sure until Monday night that I was actually even going to be able to be here at all, and or that I was going to be able to be in my studio. So I wanted to keep it flexible and decided, well, we'll just go with that, right? So this is what I want to see happen. I'm interested in what you're interested in. I want to know, I'm not necessarily talking about particular questions like how do you do this particular thing. We do that in the Ask Me Anything session, and if those come up, fine. But I'm interested in more bigger picture things like tell me more about writing for guitar or whatever, and I want to hear some thoughts from people about what you want to hear about, and I will address some of those topics today, and also make notes of, oh yeah, that's a really good one for me too. And when I say make notes, I've got like my sticky notes, because as digital as my world is, I'm still a sticky note person also. So yeah, I'm interested in what you're interested in so that I can be making sure I'm addressing these things. Now, I do have a few things that if nothing else comes up, I'll be sure to address. And yes, NBA championship, this is a big deal in Denver, that the Denver Nuggets have won the NBA championship. I don't follow I started to say football, basketball that much myself, but you can't help but be aware if you live around here that, wow, our team just won something big. So cool. I did watch the last few minutes of the final game. So yeah, there's a few things that I'll talk about, but I want your ideas of subject matter, okay? And so I'm just going to, just talk about random things until stuff, oh, wow, how to write for a young band. Oh my gosh, that's a perfect, wonderful subject. And writing for harp. So Marla, you will know much more than me about pedal harp versus lever harp. So I'll be very interested in hearing your thoughts about that. And my canon into MuseScore 4. So we'll talk about that. Yeah, lots of stuff here. And yeah, unfortunately, MIDI is not something I can talk much about because I really don't have experience with complex MIDI setups. I really don't do anything. So the future of church choir music going bye-bye. Wow, well, that's a really interesting thing that you've brought up there, Richard. So I'm curious to know what you mean by that, because I guess I don't perceive that myself. My connection to church is mostly two types. Either the Catholic church that I grew up in, and I'm not necessarily attending regularly, but I have attended masses from time to time over the years, and there's still choral music that I hear, although the masses we go to are typically not ones with full choirs. But also, there's a tradition of these sort of, I don't know what you would even call them, like Unitarian churches and other churches that have a sort of a more, modern, looser aesthetic to them, in which they have their own style of music that's not necessarily choral. So yeah, the contemporary music is definitely, I think that's what you're referring to. But I feel like the choral music is still a thing in Lutheran churches, Catholic churches, other churches that are coming from that kind of tradition. So that is anyhow an observation. All right, so these are some really good things to talk about, and I'm just going to talk about them some here and keep giving me more ideas. Some of these are going to be really hard to just like go into detail on, but I do want to talk about a few things. So Katrina, your first thing about writing for young band. writing for young band is it is definitely an interesting challenge, and I'm curious to know who else here is doing that. So I have some limited experience doing that. When I was in high school, I wrote for our high school band and we played my arrangements occasionally. And so I have that. I also have the experience that Colleen can attest to of writing for a band, not of young people, but of older people who aren't necessarily professional musicians. It's not like writing for elementary school. I mean, these are good musicians, but there are ones in which you write differently than you might write for professional musicians. But I think you're talking about like something different. You're talking about writing for like elementary school students where you're really writing simple things, right? So there's a few things that I can talk to about that musically, but as far as how you're going to do it in MuseScore, it's not going to be different than writing for professional groups. So what I want to do actually is show you a piece that is totally, I happen to have this folder pulled up here. These are some pieces that I was working on for my wife. Yeah, so concert man, beginning, intermediate. So yeah, and I haven't written for that situation specifically. But let's talk about some of what might be involved. So let me pull up a few of these pieces here. And these are like pieces for recorder duet and other sorts of things of that nature. And let's talk about some, and this one actually uses some MuseScore features that will be good to talk about. So yeah, let me go and disable this one option. So what I'm doing right now, I want to narrate what I'm doing. Notice that right now, this score here is kind of, it's centered in the window, but I can't see it very well. In fact, I'm just going to move the chat over here. That might actually solve my problem better. It was centered in the window. I have a setting that keeps the score centered. And now I can't access my menu, which I do want to access, but let's do this. If I go to Edit, Preferences, and then Canvas, you'll see this option that says Limit Scroll Area to Page Borders. So I'm going to uncheck that option right now. When I do that, the score is still centered, but you'll see it now also allows me to scroll it sideways. And so if you want to keep your score kind of centered like that, so it doesn't scroll off the screen so much like that, especially if you have a mouse that like allows that kind of thing easily and you're accidentally scrolling sideways, that option will, the option that I had there, the limit to scroll to page borders, is a useful option. So let's talk about some of the things that I'm using in here. So this is written not for band, but it's written as a recorder duet, or really any, it could also be mallet instruments, right? Orff instruments or something like that. So what you can see here is that I'm using a couple different features here specifically for really young musicians. I'm using both the colored notes that go with the Orff instruments, also, I'm putting the note names in the note heads, right? Those are the two things that I'm doing here. So you probably don't actually want those two things, but they're two things that are very MuseScore specific that I can talk about. And then I'll talk about some musical things also. So if you want to put those colors in your notes, there's a plugin for it. And I believe, I've never used that plugin in MuseScore 4, but I think it's there. I think if I go to Plugins, Manage Plugins, and then look, I've downloaded a lot of plugins, but I think even if you haven't downloaded any, it comes with this one that says Color Notes. So I'm going to select that plugin and then click Enable. By doing that, that plugin is now available to me to use. And now it's available to me kind of forever. So if I return to my score, I can, let me just go and add some more notes. Let's put something in those first two measures. I guess I had a 2-measure intro that I was expecting here. If I go, let me turn off multi-measure rest by pressing M, and now I'm going to enter some notes. So I entered quarter notes even though I'm in 6/8 because I wasn't really thinking. The note heads are automatically in there. I'll talk about that in a minute. But now let's talk about the coloring. I'm going to select that passage, and now I can come to the plugins menu and color notes. Color notes. There's a menu called color notes, and there's one thing in it called color notes. When I run that, it doesn't look like anything happened because everything is selected, and therefore it's blue. But as soon as I unselect, you'll see everything is colored. And this is a fairly standardized set of colors. These colors are used by many manufacturers of instruments for children. So C being red, D being orange, E being yellow, etc. These are standardized colors that are used across the spectrum of musical instruments. I think they originally came from a line of instruments called boom whackers, which are just like plastic tubes that you whack against the ground and they resonate in a particular pitch. I think that's where these colors came from, but they're now all over the place. So, but as someone is mentioning here, and for whatever reason, my whoever has the most recent comment, my code to pop out the chat here, I lose the name. You can also do that without without using a plugin if you go to the properties panel. So you can select a note and then come over to the properties panel, and under here, under appearance, you'll see there's where you can set the color. In MuseScore 3, it's the inspector, but it's way more work to do it that way. But if you need some custom coloring, by all means, you can do that. But if you just want to use the standardized boom whacker colors, plugin does it great. And yes, definitely does that for you in MuseScore 3 as well. And that's what I created this score, because this score I created a couple years ago. I just wasn't sure if the color notes came pre-installed in MuseScore 4 or not, but it does. So, so that's the color. Now, for the note names, the best way to do that, notice as I entered the notes, the note names appeared. And also if I change the pitch, like I'm going to click this note and hit down arrow, now it's a B. Hit it again, now it's B flat, and the note names are automatically updating, right? That is because I have the entire staff set to use note names, and I'll show you how to do that. I'm going to right-click the staff, and then go to Staff Part Properties, and then Advanced Style Properties. And here you see a setting that says Note Head Scheme. The Note Head Scheme is set to pitch names. The default is just normal, and then they're just going to be normal note heads. But you can see you can set them to pitch names. You can set them to German pitch names, so you get H instead of B. You can set them to solfege movable do, meaning whatever key signature you're in, that will be used as do. The tonic will be used as do, or solfege fixed do, in which, you know, the note C is always do. That's basically just French or Italian naming, really, Spanish naming. And then there's these different shape systems that are used in shape note notation that's used in certain churches and other traditions as well, where they have each note head having a different shape according to its pitch. So anyhow, that's how you can do that. And that's it. That process is exactly identical between MuseScore 3 and MuseScore 4. So once you set up your staff that way, then the notes just get set up that way. As you enter them, they're automatically correct. By the way, I want to comment about one thing about MIDI that Dave mentioned. I did respond to your thing in there, and yeah, it is definitely up to you not to create MIDI loops. That is what you had created, was a MIDI loop in which your input was routed, your output was routed back to your input. That's going to cause problems, not just in MuseScore, but in life in general. So definitely that's something to watch out for. So Katrina, I realize that this isn't necessarily addressing your specific thing, but I guess what I would say is there's not a lot of MuseScore specific things that you would do differently when writing for children versus other than this, right? Or writing for young musicians. How you use MuseScore is going to be identical. Now, how you write musically to cater to younger musicians is an interesting thing. The simplest things that I can tell you are these. Don't write anything too rhythmically complex. try to use the same rhythms over and over again as much as possible. And big one, restrict the range, right? Don't write too high, don't write too low for instruments, because those are going to be the notes that are hard to produce for most instruments. Try to have doubling as much as possible, right? Don't have the second alto saxophone part be the only person in the band playing that part. Make sure it's also what, say, the second clarinets have, or what the horns have, or something, so that people, so there's not too many different things going on at the same time, and people can hear other people playing their same parts. These are things that I know are typically done in writing for young audiences. Restrict the range, keep rhythms simple, and try to double as much as possible. And not just to give, well, that helps give players confidence. If they're not sure about what they're playing, they hear someone else playing it, and they can kind of, go with what they're hearing, which is not a bad thing. It's using your ear is a good thing. You want to read and use your ear. Now, simply because I can, and I want to, I am going to show you my hot cross buns that I loaded, because I've been playing with this, and a couple of you have seen it before and heard me talk about it before. But this is an arrangement. So hot cross buns is like the simplest recorder song that anyone ever learns in third grade, right? And it goes like this. Well, first of all, there's the American hot cross buns and the UK hot cross buns. This is the American hot cross buns, which is much simpler still than the UK version. In fact, I should have my soprano recorder for this so that I can play that. Don't worry, you'll find this fun. I think you will. So. So that's hot cross buns, the American version, which is simplified from the UK version, right? Everyone starts with this every year, right? So there's some lessons to learn from the fact why this type of piece is used. On soprano recorder, I can do it with only one hand. Ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum. So I only need to know 3 notes to play this melody. That idea, this is like that idea that I talked about of restricting range, but taken to a ridiculous extreme, right? It's restricting the range to just 3 notes. So I'm not saying you would need to do that if you're writing for a middle school concert band or something, but it's an example of the sort of thing, how you decide how much of the range of these instruments you want to chop off. In order to make it more playable. Now, what I wanted to do to have fun with this is provide some accompaniment. And I have levels of accompaniment here. And I'm going to try to play these because it's going to be fun. I'm going to fumble by the end, but it's going to be fun, I promise. I'm going to let MuseScore play the top part, and I'm going to play the bottom part. And what you'll see is the bottom part starts off simple. And that's playable by beginning recorder players. It's marginally, even this version here is marginally more complicated than the original hot cross buns, because it requires using both hands to play those notes. But I'm going to actually be playing them on alto recorder, because that's how I wrote it, and the fingerings are different. Anyhow, you're going to see each version of it gets more complicated still. And my idea was that we could use these different accompaniments depending on the skill level. Like pretty much anyone who's mastered hot cross buns is ready to then play that first accompaniment. Then, after they're just a tiny bit more skilled, they'll be able to handle this next accompaniment here. The next accompaniment here requires more skill and so forth. So anyhow, it's just going to be fun. It's going to be fun. I'm going to have fun. I don't care. I'm going to play it. So here's MuseScore playing hot cross buns. And now I'm going to start accompanying it. Let me know if the balance is okay. There you go. Well, I'm still not a good recorder player, but I'm getting there. I've been practicing this. I'm getting there. So anyhow, this last version, right? Let's talk about what makes something easy or what makes something hard, right? So you can see these are easy because they're quarter notes and eighth notes, and I'm repeating the same thing. Ba-dum, ba-da-dum, do-dum, ba-da-dum, right? I'm repeating the same thing. So you only have to learn that measure, and then you repeat it. As I get more complicated, I'm doing less of that sort of repeating things, but I do some. This little line here, do-da, boo-dum, bum, boo-doo-dum, and then do-dum, do-da-dum is a little different, right? I got to take that, the first, this basic pattern that I'm playing and repeat that same rhythm, but with new pitches. But by using the same rhythm that I used before, it's still a little simpler than what I get to later. And same with this guy here. Do-da, do-da, dun, da-da-da, bum. And then again, the same measure. Do-da, boo-dum, bum, boo-dum, bum. So I get to repeat that measure. This pattern here, dum, ya, do, dum, ya, do, dum, ya. That pattern there is the same rhythm over and over again. That makes a big difference. Now, I'm not saying that this is a crazy hard thing to play. I don't know why that one is so hard for me to play. It's just the fingerings on alto recorder that make that a pain. So there's another thing to know. You got to be able to play your instruments, because if you were to look at this, piece here, you would look at that line right there. Right? You'd look at that and say, well, that's easy. It's easy compared to the one that came before it. But what I can tell you, as not a very good recorder player who's been practicing this thing, is I can actually play this eighth note line better than I can play this line. And it just has to do with the actual mechanics of which fingers I need to be moving in which ways and how many different fingers I need to lift at the same time. So the lesson there is, if you want to write for young musicians, you do need to understand how to play each of their instruments so you know what's easy and what's hard on them. So on clarinet, for instance, this is a clarinet, it's metal, but it's a clarinet. There's a thing here where you're lifting your notes, fingers one at a time to play a scale, and then there's a point at which to get from this B flat, which is here, to a B, which is here, you have to put all your fingers down. So if you have a passage that goes back and forth between a B and a B flat a lot, it's going to be hard to play. Now, we have alternate fingerings that we learn so that we can play B without having to put all our fingers down, but it's going to be a little out of tune and sound weird. So you don't want to write passages that keep crossing that break between B flat and B on a clarinet. And other instruments, saxophones have a similar break at a different place. There's similar issues that come up for each instrument where you really want to understand the mechanics of playing that instrument. On brass, which instruments require which notes require the third valve, right? It's not like playing the third valve is harder than the other valves, but it is your fourth finger. I'm using the wrong hand. It's your fourth finger that plays the third valve. And if you're a young player and you haven't been playing much, and it's mostly, there's not as many notes that need the third valve. So you probably don't have the dexterity in your fourth finger, because most people don't anyhow. Pianists are kind of famously not having a lot of dexterity in their fourth fingers. And that's how Schumann kind of wrecked himself, supposedly, was by attempting to give himself some stretches that would improve his fourth finger, and actually ended up making it worse and went crazy. At least that's the story. I don't know how true it is. So knowing which notes are going to be a little harder to play. Like one thing I didn't know on recorder, for instance, this note here, you hear how came out? That note, it's not just because I'm not a good player, which I'm not, but that note is harder than the notes around it. Well, that time I deliberately blew funny. But there's certain notes on recorder that tend to not speak as well as others. And knowing, and that's what makes this last line, this line right here, This line is crazy hard to play, not just because it's 16th notes, but because it's uh, every single one of those note changes required lifting two fingers and putting a third finger down. It wasn't just like a scale where you're just lifting up a finger or putting a finger down from note to note. It was like changing three fingers to get from one note to the next. That's harder than just putting one finger down. So you absolutely need to know the instruments to write effectively for them, especially when writing for young musicians. So that's a really great topic to have brought up. And I'm sorry if there's not much more specific that I really can tell you, but I think there's just some useful things there. Maybe it's somewhat obvious, but hopefully interesting to hear about anyhow. Bob has a really good point, something that checks the difficulty of your playing. And, it's kind of interesting because if you upload a score to MuseScore.com, it'll attempt to assess the difficulty. And I have no idea what that's based on. But in principle, someone could totally write a plugin. You're right. You're absolutely right that someone could write a plugin that would attempt to assess difficulty. Yeah, I wouldn't I wouldn't necessarily trust the judgment of it, but it could be a good starting point. As with many things in AI, I look at them as, well, it's going to give me some possibly useful information that I can then evaluate. And if you think about how long you might spend researching things and asking questions and doing Google searches, if a single thing gives you some piece of information as a starting point that you can then work from, like in assessing difficulty, if it's going to point out passages, then you could look at them yourself and say, oh, I think you're right. That really is kind of a hard passage. Or maybe it will point it out and as difficult and you'll go, no, I actually think that one's not. But at least it did some of the work for you in finding some things to look at. So it's really interesting about that Pinky, about the harp. I saw that comment from you, Marla. It's kind of interesting. For me, I have to say, playing harp, I've never actually played it, but just knowing how it works would freak me out in the sense that the strings just look too much the same to me. It's like guitar in that sense. You can put a guitar in front of me and I can work out which finger goes on which fret to make which note if I want to do the math of it, but it's too hard for me to just put my finger on the note and know where it is. The way on the piano, the arrangement of the white keys and the black keys is very physical. Now, I understand on guitar, the C's are coded in such a way that you can find them easy, but that's still 7 more notes in between there to have to kind of guess on where they are without the black keys between them. That piano kind of makes a bit simpler. So, anyhow, that is my observation there. And yeah, harp is a whole subject that I'm going to love to explore in more detail at some point. Meanwhile, I do want to come back and just take a look at some of the other comments that got mentioned here as far as, just other topics to talk about. Because like I said, this is wild card. I'm going to talk about what people want me to talk about. And I want to not have missed things along the ways. Richard was talking about formal 4-part choirs declining. That's a good observation. Needing ones that accommodate fewer singers and voices, narrower ranges, fewer men. Yeah, and that's always a thing in choral music for quite some time. There's not as many men interested in singing in choirs. That is the common thing that schools always deal with, as well as churches. So you have a similar thing in writing choral music to accommodate not fully like top-notch professional choirs, but the kind of thing you might typically have in a church, where there might be some really good singers and some people who are there because they want to sing in the church, and they can carry a part with help if it's not too hard, right? And so that's what you're looking for, which is kind of the same thing you'd say about a young concert band. So you're looking at similar things of writing with restricted range, trying to balance in such a way, like if you know there's going to be fewer men, as there typically are, then maybe you have the tenors and basses double each other more and not worry about having 4 independent parts so much. Or, you otherwise do things splitting the sopranos into 2 sopranos to kind of thin them out some, or just saying, hey, half the sopranos could drop out here so that they don't overpower everyone else. So there's all sorts of things like that can happen in writing choral music that you could do to kind of make it fit the kind of situation you're going to deal with. There was something else I was going to say along those lines. Oh yeah, voice leading. When we study voice leading, like in the basic music theory course, I just posted this week a lesson on voice leading that I took from, I believe, the harmony course. I also have a lesson from the counterpoint course. There are 2, variations on the same thing. But I posted one of those to the basic theory course to give you kind of an idea of what the subject means. And it is basically telling you the equivalent of stuff like when I was talking about this passage here being I can't sing that line. It's too hard. Well, that's my point. I can't sing that line because it's too hard for me. Elizabeth, I know you can nail that line, but it's that's what it is. It is the arpeggiation of a German 6th chord with an added chromatic neighbor tone. So it's not something that you would normally ask someone to sing because the intervals in it are quite awkward. There's a tritone in it. It's actually, that's really the worst thing about it. No, there's a diminished 7th and a tritone to have to sing in the thing, or an augmented 6th, I should say, because it's an augmented 6th chord. And so it's not something that's easy to sing, not just because it's leapy, that's a thing also, but because of the specific intervals. So knowing about which intervals, knowing voice leading, yeah, no, Elizabeth's not going to sing that high G, I don't think. Yeah, I just meant the line itself, maybe down an octave. I know you've got a nice high A because I've heard your lovely high A. But yeah, no, this goes higher than that. But down an octave, you'd nail this thing. So, so knowing voice leading, it's about creating melodies that are going to be easier to sing. That's why it's called voice leading, but it also has good, effect on the ear. So that's one reason we study voice leading, is because it produces things that sound better, but also because it does make it easier to sing and instrumentally perhaps easier to play. But then you also need to know some things about, you also need to know some things about the individual instruments to know, just because something is good voice leading doesn't mean it's going to be easy to play on a given instrument. And just because it's bad voice leading doesn't mean it's hard. This right here, terrible. Oh, wait a minute. I don't have my piano keyboard, but I'll turn on my keyboard for a second. I'm going to play something right now that's terrible voice leading, but is ridiculously easy to play. I just put my hands down on the keys and I'm wiggling them. That's easy. I can do that really fast. I made it a little hard on myself by stretching too much. I can play this all day long, and it's going to be not hard to play. But voice leading wise, that makes no sense as a melody. It's kind of interesting. I kind of like it now. So voice leading will definitely tell you to do things that are designed to be easier to sing, easier to play, and also sound good. But just because something's bad voice leading doesn't mean it's going to be hard to play. So there is that to know also. And yeah, the national anthem in the United States is a pretty rangy piece as far as such things go. All right. Well, I'm having fun here. So hopefully you're having fun with all these kind of random observations and things here. So let me also talk about one thing that I want to show you. Oh, because Colleen, I think we lost you, right? Because are you already gone? Well, you can tell us. You can watch this on the replay. But you asked about the loading up the thing from the project. I think that's what you're asking about. See if I can find your thing. You're asking about loading into MuseScore 4, how to get Canon thingy into MuseScore 4. So without knowing for sure which Canon thingy you mean, I can certainly look at a couple here. So I had made in my scores, and then under Mastering MuseScore, and then under Community, the form that says Community Canon Submission. This is, I created it in MuseScore 3.6, but all I did was I download that thing and then open it in MuseScore 4, and it'll tell you it was created in MuseScore 3.6. And this is meant to be then the template for you to write your own melodies. So for those of you who are in the music theory, the basic theory course, you know what I'm talking about here. If not, what we're doing here, oh good, yeah, so the example form, that is exactly what this is. So this is the example form. So what you're going to do is go to go to where the community is here, community, and then you click over where it says cohort. And then you're going to go to where it says Final Project, Community Canon. And I click the See More to make sure I can see the whole thing. And right there where it says Community Canon Submission, you'll click there. It'll offer you to save it somewhere. So save it to your scores folder, right? You'll save it. You'll go to, you'll have to know where how to find your scores folder, or it doesn't even matter. Save it wherever you want. Just know what folder you're saving it to. And then from within MuseScore, do Control-O to open a file and make sure you go to that same folder, and then you can open the file and it will open it, which is what I just did here. So once it's open, what we'll see is it's a series of 2-bar fragments that are the Pachelbel Canon progression. Right? So it's that chord progression. And the idea here is that everyone is supposed to write in their own 4 melodies. And I give you in the project some very specific guidelines for how those should go in terms of like, well, one of them is primarily quarters, one's primarily eighths, one's primarily sixteenths, one's more varied in the rhythms. But I also talk more about the voice leading we're looking for, use of non-chord tones we're looking for, talk some about avoiding parallel fifths and octaves, talk about all these details that are kind of the culmination of everything we've been doing in the basic theory course. So let's talk about this thing here. So how it's structured. It's it's only 2 bars because these are slow. These are quarter notes. If I start at the beginning of how it normally goes, they're played excruciatingly slow. It's usually played no faster than 60 beats a minute and often slower. Like I have it marked 42 here because that's kind of a typical tempo for it. People play this really slowly. So they're really slow quarter notes. And so that's all. If you're thinking of them as half notes, then it's 4 bars. But no, these are quarter notes at a really slow tempo. So the idea here is that we're going to enter our melodies into those 2 bars. And, you can work them out on the piano, work them out on an instrument, work them out on your voice first, but then you'll enter them here. And if I do that, let me just enter some notes in here. I'm going to do Dust in the Wind because I can. And then and now I'll do an 8th note. Now notice as I finished that first melody there, got the last note into the second measure, it went on to the next example. And that's okay. I can just start entering my next melody here. Or I could hit escape and go back to the beginning here and play it so I can hear it. So the observation that I had made about that piece is, yes, if you make an ascending melody, if you make an ascending melody here, you essentially have Dust in the Wind. And you have parallel fifths as a result, right? So we have parallel fifths if we do that ascending melody. In the actual song, Dust in the Wind, the bass line does not do that. It doesn't use root position A chords. It uses an A chord in first inversion. It's not in the key of D, it's in the key of C, I think. But it uses a first inversion 5 chord so that the melody can ascend like this, and you don't have those parallel fifths that we got from there. So that was something I pointed out in the video I posted this, just yesterday, actually. But that idea that I just entered that melody into those couple bars, and now I'm kind of done, kind of happy with it, I can then move on to the next couple bars and just enter my 8th note version of a melody in there. And, think about, I'm just going to make up a little melody. Whoops. Oh, I just entered a quarter note by mistake. I meant to enter 8th notes. Here's what I could do is I could hit undo and just re-enter that D as an 8th note. But I do try to, sometimes not do that all the time. I use Shift Q to shorten that note. Shift Q again, shortened it again. So it went from a quarter note to a dotted 8th to an 8th. Similarly, Shift W will lengthen the note a little bit every time by adding a dot and then going to the next note value. So I got my 8th note D, and then maybe a B, and then C. Whoops. Okay, now this time I typed an A and I meant to type a C, so I'm just going to undo, type my C, A, and now I kind of want to put in a B because I was thinking, but you notice what just happened there? Parallel octaves. Here's an octave, and then an octave. So this idea that I thought I was going to write, I don't really want to write this thing. Yeah, I got to think a little hard about what this melody is going to be. But the point is, I can just think about it 2 measures at a time. And when I play this thing, let me start from the beginning again. Notice it paused there. And the reason it paused there is because I added a section break to the end of that. And I can see now I also added a chord symbol that played back because I forgot to turn play off on the thing. I deleted it and then I added it back. And so now everyone's going to hear F sharp minor chords when you go to play your pieces. Maybe I'll try to fix that and re-upload it when we're done here. But yeah, let's talk about that. What I had done was I had entered this chord progression, and then I had used the properties panel or the inspector in MuseScore 3 to disable playback for all those chord symbols so that it wouldn't play the chord symbols. But then I started thinking, that F sharp minor chord, as I discuss in the lesson, and again, if you're not in the theory course, you're not knowing all the things that I'm referring to here, but I'm trying to make sense even if you haven't seen the video. That chord there is sometimes in the actual Pachelbel canon is sometimes an F sharp minor, and sometimes it's a D chord with an F sharp in the bass, a 1 chord in first inversion. And so I was going to enter that as like an alternate chord symbol, and then I changed my mind, and so I re-entered the F sharp minor chord and forgot to turn playback off on it. So that's why when I went and played that thing, we suddenly heard the F sharp minor chord out of the blue. It's because I had entered that. So I'm gonna fix that, and the way I fix it is by turning off play in properties. There's other ways of disabling chord symbol playback that'll either work temporarily or will also affect other chords. There's different ways of disabling chord symbol playback, but that's what I've chosen to do here. I selected all the chord symbols. So to do that, by the way, right click one, select similar. Now all the chord symbols are selected, and I can turn playback on or off in the properties panel. I'm going to remember not to save this version though, because I want to do this in MuseScore 3 so that people who are not using MuseScore 4 at all can still access this. So the section break is what I added, and that is what caused it to pause playback. And that's why it is pausing right now, because of that section break. You can customize the length of that pause, if I select that section break and then come over to the properties panel or inspector in MuseScore 3, you'll see 3 seconds is the default pause, and you can totally change that if you want. So I did that, and I also added these text frames. So to add a text frame, you select a measure, and then you go to, I'm going to use the plus menu here on the toolbar, or you could use the add menu, or you can use the palettes, but I want to go to frames and then insert text frame, and that will insert a text frame. And there's my text frame that I can then double click and type some text into, right? So that's how I added those frames to have this explanatory stuff. Another thing I did in creating these you might find useful is there wasn't quite enough space between the frame. By the time I added the chord symbols and the chord symbols above the staff, like these chord symbols above this second melody here, and the Roman numerals below the first one, it was a little too crowded around that frame. So I went to the frame itself. I selected the frame, and then if you select the frame, I'm trying to make sure I've selected the frame and not the text. If you come over to Properties or Inspector, you'll see settings that say Gap Above and Gap Below. It defaulted to 7 spaces. Well, I just increased it to 8, and that did the job for me. And then after I did it once, you click the ... there, and you'll see a button. If you make a change here, like let me make a change, I'll change it to 9. Now when I click the ... you'll see Save as Default Style for this score. In MuseScore 3, it's just sort of a cryptic S button that you'll easy to not see at all or not know what it's for. In MuseScore 4, you do have to click the ... to find it, but then when you do find it, it's very clearly labeled. Save as default style for this score. Very clear what it's doing. So if I increase this to 11.5 and then do the save as default style for the score, you'll see now all my text frames have that extra space added, right? So anyhow, that's how I created this thing. Let's undo some of those changes. All right, that's good enough. I'm not going to save this. So yeah, I'm loving the discussion about the harp and transferring from instrument to instrument. And so, Marla, I don't know if you've seen this, but I'm going to show it to you. I'm going to show you this because it's kind of cool. I'm going to load up the nightly build from last night, and try to take a look at this harp diagram thing, because MuseScore has some new harp features coming in 4.1, and I think I tried to show them before, but they weren't totally there, and I think they are as there as they're going to be now. So I'm going to create a score, and I'm going to select, it's under strings plucked, or is it? Yes, it's under strings plucked harp, and I'll add myself a harp, and good enough. I've got my harp in the score. Let me close that mixer because I don't need that. I've got my harp here, and what we'll see now is that there is a harp notation palette. And if I open that, I've got 2 different styles of pedal diagrams available. What's under more? Anything? Nothing. Okay. So I'm gonna do the fancy graphic one. I'm going to click a note and click that fancy harp notation picture, and it puts in a harp diagram right there in the score. And now what's going to happen? I think if I click it, it pops up this pop-up window that lets me select which pedal things I want. Oh, I want D flat. I want C sharp. I want B natural. I want E natural. I want F sharp. I want G sharp, and I want A. Why did I do this? This is basically a major scale. Let me change it. Yeah, this is an A major scale except without a D. I made it D flat so that I would get 2 C sharps and no Ds, so that I don't have a 4th. So, Okay, here's an interesting thing about writing for harp. So I know a little about writing for harp because I've studied it. Marla knows about playing the harp, and you can correct me on any things that I'm talking about here. But it's often the case. So first of all, a harp is like an incredibly fascinating instrument in terms of the fact that it only has basically 7 strings over and over again. So seven. So one C. It's got a bunch of C strings, a bunch of D strings, a bunch of E strings, a bunch of F strings, but there's not a C sharp string. There's not a E flat string. There's just a C string, and then you use the pedal to control whether those C strings are C's or C sharps. Right? That's how pedal harp works. Lever harp has levers that do a similar thing. But differently. So you have to kind of choose as you're writing each little passage of music which notes you want to have available. You can't have a C and a C sharp in the same passage because they're both going to need that C string. But what you could do is if you wanted to have a C and a C sharp, you could use D flat instead of C sharp. So you could have C natural and D flat, and then you could have both of those notes available, right? There's all sorts of little tricks you have to think about in like, okay, this little melodic passage, how would I do that on harp? And then you would plan out, is there a set of pedal positions that will accomplish that? Now, harpists will often figure that out for themselves, where to change the pedals, but it's still your job as a composer to have not made that job impossible, right? You can't write a chord that has notes that can't be played at the same time and then expect a harpist to figure out how to do it, because it ain't gonna be possible. So you've got to make sure the line is possible at all. And then you don't have to put in your own harp diagrams as a composer, because harpists might want to write in their own. And Marla, I would totally take your advice on that. And yeah, Marla, you can totally quickly change, but what if it's like back and forth quick between the C and the sharp, the C and the C sharp, or what if they literally are chord at the same time? If we want to play that sucker, right? So if it's this sound, a C sharp and a C at the same time, then this C sharp has got to be a D flat. Is the only way you can play that. Or we could fake the C by calling it D sharp, right? All sorts of crazy things that you might do as a harpist. By the way, this was the diagram version. If I switch to the text version, you'll see now it displays using letter names, but it's the same basic diagram. And those are the two different styles of harp diagram. You'll either see them used with these graphical symbols that are like kind of a graphical representation of the actual pedals, or as just text. I sort of feel like the text indication is probably the more common one to use, but Marla, I will absolutely use take your advice on that if you have a preference yourself between the pictures or the text-based indications of the diagrams. Jazz harp is indeed a thing, but it's a very small thing. So there's like a couple of famous jazz harpists. Deborah Conan Hansen Conant is one. What's the Colleen? What's the guy that the woman that Rodney Franks plays a lot on Kuvo? She did kind of like bebop-y sort of stuff on harp. It was pretty impressive, but I can't remember her name. Someone from like the 60s or something like that. Someone maybe can figure that out. But there was a fairly well-known jazz harpist in like the 60s or 70s or something whose name is escaping me. But the thing that's hard about playing jazz on it is if you're improvising, the pedals add this whole extra level of complexity unless you're just improvising diatonically. Improvising diatonically is easy on harp, as easy as on any other instrument, but it's much more complicated to improvise chromatically on harp than any other instrument. And so as a result, you don't get a ton of jazz harpists. I did have a harp student. I had a jazz piano student once who wanted to study jazz piano, and so I taught her jazz piano. She was a harp major, but she wanted to study jazz piano, so she studied jazz piano with me, and we worked out some harp stuff. Oh, Dorothy Ashby. Thank you. That is absolutely the name. That is actually absolutely the person I'm trying to think of. So yeah, Dorothy Ashby, well worth checking out. So anyhow, those are some new harp features that exist. I think there might be something else, some other things here or there, some other markings that, under the articulations palette that maybe the harmonics or something work. I'm not really sure. But in any case, so anyhow, that's some stuff coming in MuseScore 4.1 about harp writing and about harp writing for harp. And I want to do another whole session, because I feel like we did a session on harp before, and I had a guest come on and we couldn't get the sound working right, and it was such a drag, because went to all the trouble to have Marla's teacher come on and Maria, and just technical issues got in the way. So, we're going to try another version of that after 4.1 comes out. The other cool thing that's going to be coming, maybe as early as tomorrow, I'm not sure, is MuseScore 4.1 is going to have a Braille feature built in. MuseScore 4 already has Braille export. So if you write some music, in MuseScore 4, you can go to File, Export, and choose Braille as your format, and you'll get a Braille file that a Braille display, which is like these little pins that come up that you put your hands over. Braille, you can totally read a MuseScore file in Braille, or have it embossed onto actual paper, where the raised dots are produced by a machine. So MuseScore 4 can already export to Braille, but 4.1 is going to have additional Braille features in which the Braille dots will actually display directly on your score without having to export it. So visually, we'll be able to see the dots there, but also that will get output to a Braille display. So if you have a Braille display plugged in to your computer while reading a MuseScore, instead of having to do it like one note at a time and hear the screen reader say, C, quarter note, measure 4, whatever it says, and then one note at a time redo everything, it's going to actually give you the entire measure right there on your Braille display in traditional music Braille. So that's almost certain coming in MuseScore 4.1. The code is likely to be merged in today or tomorrow, so that the nightly build tomorrow or the next day will have that enabled. And so I'm going to try to show that off sometime soon and see what else we can do around it. So, and then by 4.2, we're expecting to have Braille input also, where you will use 3 keys on your keyboard or 6 keys on your keyboard as if it was a Braille input device, the Perkins Brailler. So it's going to use 6 keys on your keyboard to let you input music as Braille. So that's going to be pretty cool. But that's probably not going to make 4.1, but it will come soon, because the code is basically there. It's just not as well tested or integrated as it needs to be. So, So yeah, and Elizabeth, I'm going to want to talk to you more about your experience at UNC and about 4.1 stuff. So yeah, I'll be in touch with you shortly about that kind of stuff. So where did the time go? Yeah, talking about lots of random things. This was kind of fun. Next week will be, a more traditional thing where I'll actually be taking that Bach prelude and entering it, and because that's going to be our score of the month that we're going to work on. So we'll have that for next week. But for now, MuseScore Café theme. Oh, good. That's thanks, Dave, for that link to the Dorothy Ashby piece there. And people can go click on that while I go through and play some music. All right. So thanks, everyone, for being here. Thanks for all the interesting conversation, the ideas, the thoughts, and the commentary. I had a fun time just talking about different things that were of interest to you. It was maybe I'll I'm going to keep. I will still take more ideas for sessions overall. And MIDI is something I would love to talk about more. It's just not something I have a lot of expertise in and don't really have the hardware for to be able to do much demonstration, but maybe we can bring in a guest. So if someone has ideas, Dave or someone else has ideas for someone who would make a good guest speaker, we could try to bring in to do some stuff. We can look into that. And I'm always open to your ideas for topics you'd want to see me cover in the cafe. Anyhow, tomorrow we'll be doing a music masterclass, and I'll be talking more about Pachelbel Canon and the project that we're starting to work on now as the final project for the basic theory course, in which we create our own canon by writing our own melodies, and so hopefully some people will have some music that we can start looking at. Really looking forward to producing this canon because it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'll talk much more about that tomorrow. So thanks everyone again for being here, and I'll see you all next time.